The conference room smelled like expensive leather and fresh coffee, the kind that cost $12 a cup from the boutique place downtown. I'd been in this room 1,000 times over the past 17 years, sitting in the same chair, third from the left, close enough to the head of the table to matter but never quite at it. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table where I'd presented countless proposals, closed hundreds of deals, built an entire division from nothing. My father-in-law, Robert Cunningham, sat at the head of that table like he always did, his silver hair perfectly combed, his navy suit tailored to fit his frame exactly. He'd gained weight over the years, the success I'd helped him build showing in his expanded waistline and the confidence in his posture. To his right sat his attorney, Martin somebody, a man I'd never seen before today. To his left sat a younger guy, maybe 35, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. His name tag said, Brandon Whitmore, VP of Operations. My position. The position I'd held for the past 8 years. The position I'd earned. Except apparently I hadn't. Robert cleared his throat, that authoritative sound he made when he was about to say something he'd rehearsed. I'd heard it hundreds of times, usually right before he presented my ideas to the board, as if they were his own. I'd gotten used to that over the years, told myself it didn't matter who got credit as long as the company succeeded, as long as my family was taken care of, as long as my wife, Catherine, and our 2 kids had everything they needed. Michael, Robert said, using my full name instead of Mike, which meant this was formal, which meant this was bad. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. I know you weren't expecting this meeting. I wasn't. I'd been called in at 7:30, told it was urgent, told to come alone. Catherine had been making breakfast when I left, humming some song from the radio, completely unaware that her father was about to destroy everything we'd built together. I've asked you here today because the board and I have made some difficult decisions about the future direction of Cunningham Industries, Robert continued, his hands folded on the table in front of him, like he was praying. He wasn't a religious man. This was just performance. As you know, yesterday we finalized the merger with TechCore Solutions, the deal you spent the last 2 years orchestrating, the deal that pushed our company valuation over the $100 million mark. I'd closed that deal. I'd worked 80-hour weeks for 24 months straight. I'd missed my daughter's dance recitals and my son's baseball games. I'd canceled vacations and skipped family dinners. I'd poured every ounce of my energy and expertise into making that merger happen because Robert had promised me it would be worth it. That when we crossed that threshold, when we became a true major player in the industry, there would be rewards commensurate with the effort. He'd promised me a partnership, an equity stake, a real piece of the company I'd helped build from a mid-sized regional operation into a national powerhouse. The merger is a tremendous success, Robert said, and I waited for the but. There's always a but. But it's also brought us to a critical juncture. We're no longer a family business. We're a publicly traded corporation now, with shareholders and board members who have expectations about leadership and direction. The younger guy, Brandon, shifted in his seat, smiled slightly. I wanted to punch that smile off his face. The board has decided that to move forward, we need fresh leadership, someone with experience in managing public companies, someone who understands the pressures and demands of operating at this new level. Robert paused, looked me directly in the eyes. I'm sorry, Michael, but effective immediately. You're being replaced as VP of Operations. The words hung in the air like smoke. I heard them, understood them individually, but together they didn't make sense. Replaced, after 17 years, after building this company alongside him, after marrying his daughter and giving him 2 grandchildren and dedicating my entire adult life to making his dreams become reality. Replaced, I repeated, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. Brandon here comes to us from Meridian Tech. He's overseen 3 successful IPOs and has extensive experience in managing operations at scale. The board feels he's the right fit for where we're going. Brandon extended his hand across the table. Looking forward to working with you, Michael. Robert's told me great things about your contributions. I'm hoping we can build on what you've started here. I didn't take his hand, just stared at it like it was a foreign object. He eventually withdrew it, the smile faltering slightly. What about the promises you made? I asked Robert, ignoring Brandon entirely. What about the partnership, the equity stake? You said when we hit 100 million we'd restructure. You said I'd be rewarded for my loyalty and hard work. Robert's expression didn't change. He'd practiced this moment, rehearsed his response. Michael, those conversations were always contingent on the company remaining privately held. Now that we're public, the equity structure is significantly more complex. The board controls those decisions, not me. My hands are tied. Your hands are tied, I repeated again, tasting the bitterness of the words. You control 60% of the voting shares. Your hands are exactly where you want them to be. The attorney, Martin, cleared his throat. Mr. Porter, we're prepared to offer you a very generous severance package. 6 months' salary, continuation of your health benefits for a year, and a strong letter of recommendation. We believe this is more than fair compensation given the circumstances. Severance package, I said, and I started laughing. Not because anything was funny, but because the alternative was screaming or crying, and I'd be damned if I'd give them the satisfaction. 17 years. I've given this company 17 years. I've sacrificed everything. My time, my health, my family relationships. I've made you all wealthy. And you're offering me 6 months' salary and a letter of recommendation. Michael, Robert said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. You're upset. I understand. But this is a business decision, nothing personal. You'll land on your feet. With your experience and track record, you'll have companies lining up to hire you. Nothing personal, I echoed. You're my wife's father. You're my children's grandfather. You've sat at my dinner table every Sunday for 17 years. You've celebrated birthdays and holidays with us.
And honestly,
you've told me I was like a son to you, and this isn't personal.
Actually works better
Business
for our
and family are
shorter
separate
marriage
things,
means less
Robert
chance
said.
of anyone
I
questioning
hope
the
you can
legitimacy.
understand that.
But you initiated
I
it so
stood
I can
up.
claim emotional
The chair
distress and
scraped
probably get
against
even
the
more in the
floor with
settlement.
a
I said,
harsh
get out
sound
now. Sat
that
down in
made
the
everyone
armchair by the
flinch.
window, crossing her
Catherine
legs,
know?
still in
Does
that
your
white
daughter
negligee
know
that now
that you're
looked like a
doing
costume. This
I'll talk
is
to
our
Catherine
honeymoon
myself.
suite.
Explain the situation. She'll understand. She won't, but you'll probably convince her to anyway. You always do. I walked toward the door, every step feeling like I was moving through water, heavy, slow, surreal. This couldn't be happening. Not after everything. Not after I'd literally just closed the deal that made Robert a millionaire many times over. The timing was too perfect, too calculated. Michael, Robert called out as I reached the door. I really do hope there are no hard feelings. You're still family. This doesn't change that. I turned back to look at him. At this man I'd respected and worked for and tried to please for nearly 2 decades. At this man whose business I'd saved multiple times through sheer determination and long hours. At this man who just discarded me like I was disposable. You're right, I said. This doesn't change anything. Because you were always this person. I just didn't want to see it. I walked out of that conference room, out of that building, into the parking garage where my car waited. A sensible sedan, not flashy, bought used 3 years ago because we'd been saving money for the kids' college funds and a bigger house. Being practical, being responsible, waiting for the big payoff that was always just around the corner. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the concrete wall in front of me. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. How's your day going? Dad mentioned you had an early meeting. Love you. I didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know how to tell her that her father had just destroyed 17 years of my life in a 10-minute meeting, that the future we'd planned, the security we'd worked toward had just evaporated. So I didn't respond. I just started the car and drove. Let me take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand how completely I'd been played, how thoroughly I'd built my own trap and walked into it with a smile on my face, thinking I was building a future when really I was just making other people rich. I met Catherine Cunningham 20 years ago when I was 26 and working as a junior analyst at a consulting firm in Boston. She was 24, working in marketing at her father's company, and she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Blonde hair that caught the light just right, blue eyes that seemed to look straight through you, and a laugh that made you want to make her laugh again just to hear it. We met at a professional networking event, one of those awkward mixers where everyone stands around with cheap wine and business cards, pretending to care about industry trends, while really just trying to make connections that might advance their careers. I was there because my boss had insisted. She was there because her father had insisted. We ended up talking by the appetizer table, bonding over how terrible the spinach puffs were and how much we both hated these events. She was funny and self-deprecating and easy to talk to. She didn't mention until an hour into our conversation that her last name was Cunningham, as in Cunningham Industries, as in the mid-sized manufacturing company that was one of the rising stars in our region. Please don't let that be weird, she'd said, touching my arm lightly. People get weird when they find out my dad owns a company. They either want to use me to get to him, or they assume I'm some spoiled rich girl who doesn't work. I'm neither. I actually work for the company, but I earned my position. He makes me work twice as hard as anyone else to prove I deserve to be there. I'd believed her, believed that she was different from other wealthy kids who coasted on their family names. Believed that she understood hard work and earning your place. Believed a lot of things that turned out to be carefully crafted stories. We started dating. It was great at first. She was smart and driven and ambitious. We'd spend hours talking about business strategy and market trends and our career goals. She wanted to prove herself outside her father's shadow. I wanted to build something meaningful, to make a real impact in an industry I cared about. 6 months into our relationship, she invited me to dinner at her parents' house, a big colonial in the suburbs, the kind with a circular driveway and professionally landscaped grounds. Robert and his wife, Margaret, were gracious hosts. Margaret asked about my family, my background, my education. Robert asked about my work, my ambitions, my 5-year plan. I told him I wanted to move from consulting into operations, that I wanted to build things, not just advise on building them, that I saw the future of manufacturing shifting toward technology integration and sustainable practices, that the companies that adapted would thrive and the ones that didn't would disappear. Robert had listened carefully, asking probing questions, challenging my assumptions. By the end of the evening, he'd offered me a job. "I need someone like you," he'd said over coffee in his study, a room lined with books he'd probably never read and awards from industry organizations. "Someone who understands where we're going, not just where we've been. My current operations manager is nearing retirement. I need fresh blood, young talent, someone who can take this company into the next phase." The offer was good, not great, but good. More money than I was making in consulting, though less than I'd make if I stayed on that track for a few more years, but it was operations experience. Real, hands-on work. A chance to implement the strategies I'd only theorized about. "I'll need to think about it," I'd said, though even then I was already leaning toward yes. "Of course, take your time. Talk to Catherine about it. But Michael, I want you to know something. I'm not offering you this job because you're dating my daughter. I'm offering it because I think you're genuinely talented and could help this company grow. I need people who challenge me, who bring new ideas, who aren't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. I think you're that person." It was exactly what I wanted to hear, exactly what my ego needed. The acknowledgement that I had value beyond my relationship with his daughter, that I was being chosen for my merit, not my proximity to the family. I took the job, moved to Connecticut, where Cunningham Industries was headquartered, started working under the current operations manager, a guy named Tom, who'd been with the company for 30 years and was more than ready to retire. He taught me the systems, introduced me to the suppliers and the floor workers and the logistics people, showed me how Robert liked things done. "Stick close to the old man," Tom advised me one day over lunch in the cafeteria. "He likes to feel in control. Present your ideas like they're his ideas. Give him the credit and he'll give you the freedom to actually implement what you want. It's a dance, but once you learn the steps, it works pretty well." I followed that advice. Learned to frame my proposals in ways that made Robert feel smart for agreeing with them. Learned to accept public credit for his contributions while doing the actual work behind the scenes. Learned to be the person who made things happen while letting other people take the bows. It worked. The company grew. We landed bigger contracts, expanded into new markets, improved our margins through better supply chain management and more efficient production processes. Most of these improvements were my initiatives, implemented through long nights and careful negotiation with resistant department heads. But when we presented results to the board or to potential investors, it was Robert's vision that got the credit. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was building experience, building a track record, that eventually my contributions would be recognized properly. Catherine and I got married after dating for 2 years. Big wedding, 300 guests, at a country club her family had been members of for generations. Her father paid for everything, which was generous, though it also meant he controlled every detail. The guest list was mostly his business associates and friends. The venue was where he'd gotten married. The band played the songs he liked, but Catherine was happy, and that mattered. She looked beautiful in her dress, and when we said our vows, I believed we were building something real together, a partnership, a future. She knew what it was like to work in a family business, to navigate the complexities of professional and personal relationships. I thought that meant we understood each other. We bought a house, a modest 3-bedroom in a good school district, stretching our budget but managing. Catherine kept working at Cunningham Industries in marketing, though increasingly she was moving toward a role that seemed more ceremonial than functional. She'd organize company events, manage social media, handle public relations. Important work, she insisted, even if it didn't involve the strategic thinking she'd once been passionate about. I was working 60, 70, sometimes 80 hours a week. The operations manager position officially became mine after Tom retired, though I'd been doing the job for a year already. Robert gave me a raise and a new title and a handshake in his office. "You've earned this, son," he'd said, and my chest had swelled with pride at being called son, at being seen as part of the family, not just an employee. "I knew you were the right choice. You've already made significant improvements to our processes. I'm excited to see what you'll do with full authority." What I did was transform the company. I brought in new technology, automated processes that had been done manually for decades, renegotiated contracts with suppliers to get better terms, expanded our product line into emerging markets, hired talented people, and built teams that actually worked cohesively instead of competing internally. Every improvement meant more hours, more travel, more time away from Catherine. But it also meant more success for the company. Revenue grew 30% the first year I fully took over operations, 40% the next year. We opened 2 new facilities, hired 200 additional workers, became a regional leader in our industry. Robert was thrilled, gave me another raise, though smaller than I'd hoped, gave me a VP title, gave me praise in meetings and bonuses that were decent but never quite matched the value I was creating. But he also gave me promises. "When we hit 50 million in revenue, we'll talk about equity," he'd said during my 3rd-year review. "I want you to be invested in this company's success, not just as an employee, but as an owner. You've earned that." We hit 50 million in my 5th year. The equity conversation didn't happen. Instead, Robert explained that the board wanted to wait until we achieved sustained growth. That one good year didn't mean we were ready to restructure ownership, that we needed to prove this wasn't a fluke. So I kept working, kept pushing, kept sacrificing. Catherine got pregnant with our first child in year 6, a daughter, Emma, who arrived healthy and perfect and demanding. I took 3 days off for her birth, then was back in the office because we were in the middle of a critical negotiation with a major client. I missed most of her first months because I was traveling constantly. Catherine understood, she said. It was temporary, she said. Once things stabilized, we'd have more time together. Things never stabilized. There was always another crisis, another opportunity, another reason why I needed to work just a little bit harder for just a little bit longer. Our son, Jacob, was born 3 years later. Same pattern. Brief paternity leave, then back to the grind. By this point, I'd been with Cunningham Industries for 9 years. We'd hit 75 million in revenue. I was managing a 100-person operations division, making decisions that affected hundreds of families, generating millions in profit. My salary had grown to 180,000 a year. Good money, especially for Connecticut, but nowhere near proportional to the value I was creating. The contracts I negotiated, the processes I implemented, the teams I built, they were generating tens of millions in additional profit. I was getting a fraction of that value in compensation. But Robert kept making promises. When we hit 100 million, he said, that's the magic number. That's when we'd talk seriously about equity, about making me a true partner in the business, about recognizing that I wasn't just an employee, but a fundamental part of the company's success. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. He was my father-in-law, the grandfather of my children, the man whose house I visited every Sunday for family dinner, the man who'd mentored me and trusted me, and I thought, valued me. So when the opportunity came up to pursue a merger with TechCore Solutions, when Robert asked if I thought I could handle orchestrating the deal, I threw everything I had at it. TechCore was bigger than us, more technologically advanced, but struggling with operations and market positioning. We had the expertise they needed. They had the resources we needed. A merger could create a combined entity worth over $100 million, could take both companies to a completely new level. But the deal was complicated. The people at TechCore were difficult. There were regulatory hurdles and financing challenges and cultural differences. It would take everything I had to make it happen. If you can pull this off, Robert had told me in his office, looking me straight in the eye, you'll have proven yourself beyond any doubt. The board, the investors, everyone will see that you're essential to this company's future and will compensate you accordingly. I give you my word. I worked on that merger for 2 years, nights, weekends, holidays, missed Emma's school plays and Jacob's soccer games, cancelled family vacations and date nights with Catherine, put every ounce of my energy and skill and determination into making that deal happen. And I did it. Against all odds, against skeptics who said it couldn't be done, I negotiated terms that satisfied both sides, found creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems, built relationships with their key people, made it work. The day we signed the final documents, the day the merger officially closed, The combined company's valuation came in at $112 million. Cunningham Industries, the mid-sized family company I'd joined 10 years ago, was now part of a 9-figure publicly traded corporation. I'd done it. I'd delivered on Robert's biggest dream, made him wealthier than he'd ever imagined, proven my value beyond question. And the very next day, he called me into that conference room and told me I was being replaced. I drove for hours after leaving the office, just drove with no destination, watching the highway blur past, trying to process what had happened, trying to understand how I'd been so blind, how I'd missed all the signs that this was always how it would end. But I hadn't missed the signs. I'd seen them and explained them away, made excuses. Believed the promises because believing was easier than accepting that I'd been used. My phone kept buzzing. Catherine calling, Robert calling, missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. I wasn't ready to talk, wasn't ready to explain, wasn't ready to see Catherine's face when she realized what her father had done. Around 3 in the afternoon, I found myself in a parking lot outside a coffee shop in some town I didn't recognize. I went inside, ordered coffee I didn't drink, and sat in a corner booth trying to make sense of my future. 17 years. I'd given this man and his company 17 years. I'd sacrificed my 20s and most of my 30s. I'd missed my children growing up. I'd neglected my marriage. I'd poured everything into building something that I thought I was part of, only to discover I'd just been a tool, useful, until something better came along. The severance package Martin had mentioned was sitting in my email. 6 months' salary, $90,000, for 17 years of work that had created millions in value. For the merger alone, I'd probably generated $20 million in added value, and they were offering me $90,000 to go away quietly. I opened the email, read through the terms. It was contingent on signing a non-compete agreement that would prevent me from working in the industry for 2 years. Contingent on signing an NDA that would prevent me from discussing the company's operations or my role in them. Contingent on signing a release, waiving any and all claims I might have against the company or Robert personally. They were buying my silence. Making sure I couldn't compete, couldn't talk, couldn't challenge. Making sure their narrative, where Robert was the brilliant CEO who'd built this empire, remained intact. Making sure my contributions disappeared into the background, credited to leadership and vision instead of the thousands of hours of actual work I'd done. I closed the email without responding, sat there in that coffee shop as the afternoon faded into evening, as other customers came and went, as the barista wiped down counters and restocked supplies. Just sat there, feeling like everything I'd believed about my life had been a lie. My phone rang again. Catherine. I couldn't avoid her forever. "Where are you?" she asked when I answered. Her voice was tight with worry. "Dad called me. He said you walked out of a meeting upset. What happened?" "Your father fired me." Silence. Then, "What? That can't be right. There must be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding. He called me in this morning, told me I'm being replaced, offered me a severance package. It's very clear." "But why? You just closed the merger. You made the company so successful. This doesn't make sense." "Ask your father. He seems to think it makes perfect sense. Business decision, nothing personal." Those were his exact words. "Michael, come home. Let's talk about this. I'm sure there's been some kind of miscommunication. Dad wouldn't just fire you after everything you've done. He knows how hard you've worked." I laughed bitterly. "He knows exactly how hard I've worked. That's why the timing is perfect. He got everything he needed from me. Now he's upgrading to someone with a better resume. Someone who'll look good to the board and investors. Someone who isn't family, so there's no awkwardness when they're eventually discarded too. You're being unfair. Dad isn't like that. Catherine, he literally just did it. How is describing what actually happened being unfair? I can't believe he'd do this. Not to you, not to us. We're family." That's what I thought too. Turns out family is just another card to play when it's convenient. I heard her start to cry. Soft sounds that once would have made me want to comfort her, to fix whatever was wrong. Now I just felt tired. Tired of being the one who fixed things, who sacrificed, who bent over backward to keep everyone else happy while my own needs were ignored. "Come home," she said again. "Please, we'll figure this out together. I'll be home later. I need some time to think." I hung up before she could respond. Sat there for another hour until the coffee shop was closing and the barista was giving me looks that made it clear it was time to leave. I drove home as the sun was setting, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if I'd been in any state to appreciate beauty. Our house looked the same as always. Neat lawn, 2-car garage, basketball hoop over the driveway that Jacob used most days. Picture of suburban normalcy. Picture of success. built on a foundation that had just crumbled into nothing. Catherine met me at the door. She'd been crying, her eyes red and puffy. She hugged me and I let her, but I didn't hug back, just stood there, arms at my sides, feeling nothing. "I talked to Dad," she said, pulling back to look at me. He explained what happened, the board decision, the need for different leadership, the public company pressures. "Michael, he feels terrible about it, but his hands really are tied. The board has the power now, not him. He controls 60% of voting shares. His hands are exactly where he wants them. That's not fair. You're making him out to be some kind of villain. He built that company from nothing. He gave you opportunities you never would have had otherwise. He made you VP, he paid you well, he trusted you with important responsibilities." I stared at my wife, this woman I'd loved for 20 years, and realized she'd never really seen me, never really understood what I'd done or sacrificed. She saw everything through her father's lens, through his version of reality where he was the hero and everyone else was supporting players in his story. "Catherine, I built that company. Not from nothing, no, but from a mid-sized regional operation to a national powerhouse. I did that. My work, my strategies, my negotiations. Your father provided capital and signed off on things. I did everything else. That's not true, and you know it. Dad made all the major decisions. You were just executing his vision. I was the vision. Every major initiative for the past decade came from me. I just learned to present them in ways that made him think they were his ideas. That's what you have to do to work with Robert. Make him feel smart while you do all the actual thinking. How dare you talk about my father that way? He's been nothing but good to you, to us. He gave you a career. He welcomed you into our family. And this is how you repay him, with disrespect and accusations." Something snapped inside me, some last thread of patience or hope or willingness to keep pretending. He used me. For 17 years, he dangled promises he never intended to keep. He made me work myself into the ground while paying me a fraction of my value. He took credit for my work and made me complicit in my own exploitation. And the moment I delivered his biggest victory, the moment I made him richer than he'd ever dreamed, he discarded me. That's not being good to someone. That's using them. You're just angry and not thinking clearly. Once you calm down, you'll see that Dad did what he had to do. That business is business and you can't take it personally. It's a business decision against my father-in-law. How could it be more personal? We stood there in the entryway of our house, facing each other across a divide that had always been there, but I'd never wanted to acknowledge. Catherine would always choose her father, would always see things his way, would always prioritize his version of events over mine. I'd known that on some level, but I'd chosen to believe that when it really mattered, when the choice was clear, she'd stand with me. That marriage and partnership would mean more than filial loyalty. I'd been wrong. "I'm going to bed," I said. "I'm tired and I don't want to fight. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out what comes next." What comes next is I find another job. I rebuild from scratch. I figure out how to provide for this family without your father's company. The severance package is generous. Dad made sure of that. 6 months' salary should give you plenty of time to find something new. As long as I sign away my rights to compete or speak or challenge anything. As long as I agree to disappear quietly. Why wouldn't you? What's the alternative? Sue Dad? Drag this through courts? Destroy our family over a business decision? I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do, but I'm not signing anything until I've had time to think. I walked past her, up the stairs, into our bedroom, changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, lay down on the bed and stared at the ceiling, watching headlights from passing cars create moving patterns of light and shadow. Catherine came up eventually, got ready for bed in silence, climbed in beside me but didn't touch me. We lay there, inches apart, miles away from each other. "I love you," she said quietly. "I know you're hurt. I know this isn't fair, but we'll get through it. We always do." I didn't respond, just closed my eyes and pretended to sleep, while my mind raced through 17 years of memories, seeing all of them in a new light. Every promise Robert had made, every time he'd taken credit for my work, every moment Catherine had sided with him instead of me, every sacrifice I'd made believing it was temporary, believing it would be worth it eventually, it had all been for nothing, or not nothing exactly. It had been for Robert, for his wealth and success and ego. I'd been the vehicle for his dreams, and now that he'd reached his destination, I was being left by the side of the road. But as I lay there in the darkness, something began to shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still there, sharp and fresh, but underneath them something else was growing, something cold and hard and focused. Robert thought he'd won, thought he'd gotten everything he needed from me and could discard me with a handshake and a severance check. Thought I'd sign his papers and disappear quietly, maybe take a job at some smaller company somewhere, fade into comfortable obscurity. He'd underestimated me. He'd mistaken kindness for weakness, loyalty for stupidity, hard work for lack of options. I'd spent 17 years building his company. I knew every process, every client, every supplier, every employee. I knew where the bodies were buried, where the corners had been cut, where the legal gray areas were. I knew his business better than he did because I'd been the one actually running it while he played golf and gave speeches and accepted awards for vision and leadership. And I knew something else, something that had been gnawing at the back of my mind since that meeting this morning. Something about the timing, about how quickly they'd moved to replace me, about how prepared everything had been, how the severance package was ready, how Brandon what's-his-name was already sitting in that conference room with his name tag and his expensive suit. This hadn't been a sudden decision. This had been planned, carefully, probably for months, which meant that while I'd been killing myself to close the merger, working 80-hour weeks and missing time with my family, they'd been planning my exit, using my work to increase the company's value, waiting for the perfect moment to push me out. Robert hadn't just betrayed me today. He'd been betraying me for months, maybe years, smiling to my face while planning to discard me, shaking my hand in meetings while plotting with lawyers and board members behind closed doors, sitting at my Sunday dinner table while knowing he was about to destroy my career. The anger that thought provoked was clarifying. It burned away the hurt and confusion and left something pure behind: purpose, direction, the understanding that I wasn't going to just accept this, wasn't going to slink away defeated, wasn't going to let 17 years of my life be reduced to a footnote in Robert Cunningham's success story. He wanted to make this business. Fine, this was business, and I was about to teach him a lesson about what happens when you underestimate the people who actually make your empire run. I woke up at 5 in the morning after maybe 2 hours of actual sleep. Catherine was still sleeping beside me, her breathing steady and peaceful. She'd always been able to sleep through anything, even the worst fights or most stressful situations. It was a gift I'd never had. I'd lie awake replaying conversations, planning solutions, worrying about problems that might never materialize. This morning, I wasn't worrying, I was planning. I got out of bed quietly, went downstairs to my home office and closed the door, opened my laptop and started going through files I'd accumulated over 17 years, project reports, financial analyses, strategic plans, email chains, meeting notes, contracts I'd negotiated, deals I'd closed, processes I'd implemented. Everything was there. 17 years of documentation showing exactly what I'd contributed to Cunningham Industries. Not Robert's vision, not his leadership, but my actual work. The initiatives I'd proposed, the problems I'd solved, the millions in value I'd created. I'd kept everything, not because I'd anticipated needing it someday, but because I was thorough, because I documented my work. Because in a company where credit was fluid and Robert had a tendency to remember things differently than they'd actually happened, I'd learned to keep records. Now those records were going to serve a different purpose. I started organizing everything into folders, sorted by year, by project, by financial impact, created spreadsheets showing the revenue growth correlated with my initiatives, built timelines showing when I'd proposed strategies and when they'd been implemented and what results they'd generated. The picture that emerged was clear. The company's transformation from a $50 million regional operation to a $100 million national player wasn't because of Robert's brilliant leadership. It was because of specific, documented actions I'd taken. Supply chain optimizations that saved $3 million annually. Technology implementations that increased productivity by 40%. Contract negotiations that opened new markets worth tens of millions. The TechCore merger that had just added $70 million in value. All me. All documented, all provable. Around 7, I heard Catherine moving around upstairs, heard her getting Emma and Jacob ready for school. The sounds of normal morning routine, breakfast and backpack checks, and reminders about homework. Our life continuing as if nothing had changed, even though everything had. Catherine came down around 7:30, already dressed for work in one of her professional outfits. She worked at the company too, though in a role that had become increasingly ceremonial over the years. She stopped at my office door, looking in at me, surrounded by papers and open files on multiple screens. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep. What are you doing?" "Documenting, going through my work history, making sure I have records of everything." "For what?" "For whatever comes next." She leaned against the doorframe, coffee mug in hand. "Michael, please don't do anything rash. Don't make this worse than it has to be." How exactly would I make it worse? I've already been fired. What's worse than that? You could fight it. You could sue. You could turn this into some big legal battle that hurts everyone, including our children. I haven't decided what I'm doing yet, but I'm not signing Robert's severance agreement, not until I understand all my options. The agreement is generous. Most people don't get 6 months' salary when they're let go. Most people don't spend 17 years building a company from scratch. Most people don't get fired the day after they close a deal that makes their boss tens of millions of dollars. I'm not most people. She set down her coffee mug with more force than necessary. You keep saying you built the company. Dad built the company. He started it 30 years ago. You just helped run operations for the last decade. 17 years, Catherine, not a decade. 17 years. And I didn't just help run operations. I transformed the entire business model. Everything successful about that company for the past 15 years came from my work. Your father provided capital and took credit. That's his actual contribution. That's not true, and it's horrible that you'd say it, especially now when you're upset and not thinking clearly. I turned to face her fully. Catherine, whose side are you on? There are no sides. You're my husband. He's my father. I love you both. This doesn't have to be some war where I have to choose. Except you already have chosen. Every time you defend him. Every time you minimize what I did. Every time you suggest I should just accept this and move on. You're choosing him. I'm trying to keep our family intact. I'm trying to prevent this from destroying everything we have. Robert already destroyed it. I'm just deciding how to respond. She picked up her coffee mug, looked at me with something like pity. I need to get to work. We can talk more tonight. You're still going to work there after what he did? It's my job, Michael, and he's my father. What happened between you two doesn't change that. She left. I heard the garage door open, her car start, the sound fading as she drove away to spend the day working at the company that had just discarded me. Working for the man who'd betrayed me, acting like everything was normal. I went back to my documentation. Spent the entire day building a comprehensive record of my contributions. By evening, I had something substantial, a presentation that would make any board member or investor question exactly what they'd just done by replacing me. But that wasn't enough. Documentation was good, but I needed strategy. I needed to understand what leverage I actually had and how to use it effectively. I called an attorney, not the family lawyer Catherine and I had used for our will and real estate transactions. A different kind of lawyer, an employment attorney who specialized in executive compensation and wrongful termination cases. Her name was Patricia Alvarez, and she came highly recommended from a quick internet search and several phone calls to professional contacts who owed me favors. She agreed to meet with me the next morning, a Saturday, which told me she recognized the urgency. Her office was in downtown Hartford, in one of those modern glass buildings that housed law firms and consulting companies. She was in her 40s, sharply dressed, with an air of competence that immediately put me at ease. I laid out everything. The 17 years of service, the promises made and broken, the timing of my termination, the severance package with its restrictive covenants, the documentation I'd gathered showing my contributions. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and studied me. Mr. Porter, I'm going to be direct with you. Do you have any written documentation of these promises Robert made? About equity, partnership, profit sharing? Emails, some meeting notes, but nothing formal like a contract. That makes this more difficult. Without written agreements, it becomes he said, he said. And in employment law, especially in at-will states like Connecticut, employers have broad discretion to terminate employees for almost any reason, even after 17 years, even when the termination happens right after I close a major deal, even then. Unless we can prove discrimination, retaliation for whistleblowing, or violation of an employment contract, they're within their legal rights to replace you. My heart sank. So there's nothing I can do. I didn't say that. Legal action isn't your only option. In fact, it might not be your best option. The severance package they're offering, while insulting given your contributions, isn't actually illegal, but the restrictive covenants might be. The non-compete and the NDA. Non-compete agreements in Connecticut must be reasonable in scope, duration, and geography. 2 years is pushing it, especially for someone at your level with your expertise. A court might find it unenforceable. And the NDA, if it's being used to silence you about questionable business practices rather than protect legitimate trade secrets, that's also potentially problematic. So I could fight those provisions? You could, but here's what I'd actually recommend. Don't sign anything yet. Take your time, do your due diligence, look at your options, and meanwhile let them sit with the uncertainty of what you might do. I don't understand. Patricia leaned forward. Mr. Porter, you have something they want. Your silence, your cooperation, your agreement not to compete or speak publicly about your role in the company's success. They're offering you $90,000 for those things. But what if those things are worth more than $90,000? How much more? That depends on what you know, what you have documented, what damage you could do if you chose to. I thought about the files on my laptop. The documentation of every questionable decision Robert had made over the years. The corners cut to save money. The regulations skirted to speed up production. The promises made to clients that couldn't quite be delivered. Nothing illegal exactly, but plenty that would look bad if scrutinized by regulators or reported by media. I have a lot, I said slowly. Years of information about how that company actually operates. Then maybe 90,000 isn't adequate compensation for your agreement to keep that information private. Maybe you deserve significantly more, and maybe you deserve it without the restrictive covenants that would prevent you from earning a living in your field. Are you suggesting I blackmail him? Absolutely not. Blackmail is illegal, and I would never advise that. I'm suggesting you negotiate. You have information and expertise that have value. They want to ensure that information stays private, and that expertise doesn't benefit their competitors. Those are legitimate business concerns that justify legitimate business compensation. You're simply negotiating for fair value. I sat with that for a moment. The idea of going back to Robert, of demanding more money, of using what I knew as leverage, it felt both satisfying and dangerous. What if he refuses? What if he calls my bluff? Then you have to decide how far you're willing to go. But Mr. Porter, from what you've told me, you've been undervalued and undercompensated for 17 years. You're owed. Not legally necessarily, but ethically, morally. Robert Cunningham built his wealth on your labor. He owes you more than 6 months' salary and a handshake. We talked for another hour about strategy and options. Patricia gave me advice on how to approach the negotiation, what to ask for, how to frame things. By the time I left her office, I had a plan. Not just a plan for getting more money, a plan for making Robert face what he'd actually done, for forcing him to acknowledge my contributions, for ensuring that whatever happened next, the truth about who'd built Cunningham Industries would be on the record. I spent the weekend refining my approach. Catherine and the kids were home, normal family time, but I was distant, going through the motions. My mind was elsewhere, running through scenarios, planning conversations, anticipating responses. Catherine noticed. Are you okay? You seem distracted. I'm fine, just thinking about next steps. Have you thought about the severance agreement? Are you going to sign it? No. No, you haven't thought about it? Or no, you're not signing. Not signing. Not as written anyway. She looked worried. Michael, please don't make this complicated. Just take the money and move on. Find a new job. Start fresh somewhere else. Don't drag this out. Why do you care so much about me signing quickly? Whose interests are you representing here? Our family's interests, our children's interests. I don't want this to turn into some nasty fight that affects all of us. It's already affecting all of us. Your father saw to that when he fired me. He didn't fire you, he made a business decision. There's no difference. We didn't talk much the rest of the weekend. She spent time with the kids while I stayed in my office preparing. By Sunday evening I was ready. Monday morning I called Robert's office. His assistant Linda answered. Hi Linda, it's Michael Porter. I need to schedule a meeting with Robert. Today if possible. Oh Michael, I don't think Mr. Cunningham is available today. He's very busy with the merger transition. I'm sure he is, but he'll want to make time for this. Tell him I need to discuss the severance agreement. Tell him I have concerns about some of the provisions, and I'd like to talk through them before making any decisions. There was a pause. Hold on. Let me check his calendar. She put me on hold, came back 2 minutes later. He can see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Perfect, I'll be there. I spent the morning preparing my presentation, printed out key documents, organized my thoughts, practiced staying calm and professional even though I was furious. At 1:45, I drove to the Cunningham Industries headquarters, the building I'd entered thousands of times over 17 years, the place where I'd spent more time than at home, where I'd built my career and my identity. I walked through the lobby like I owned it, nodded at the security guard who knew me by name, took the elevator to the executive floor. Linda looked uncomfortable when I approached her desk. He's waiting for you. But Michael, Martin from legal is in there too. Just so you're prepared. That's fine, this is a legal discussion. Makes sense to have legal present. Robert's office was exactly as I remembered. Large oak desk, expensive furniture, walls covered with awards and photos of him with various important people. He sat behind his desk in his power position. Martin sat in one of the guest chairs. I took the other chair without being invited to sit. Michael, Robert said, his voice carefully neutral. Linda said you wanted to discuss the severance agreement. What concerns do you have? I have several concerns, but let's start with the compensation. $90,000 for 17 years of service is inadequate. We believe it's quite generous, actually, Martin interjected. 6 months' salary is more than the legal requirement, which is nothing. The legal requirement isn't the standard I'm using. The standard I'm using is value created versus compensation received. Over 17 years, I generated approximately $150 million in additional value for this company. 90,000 is 0.06% of that value. That's not generous. That's insulting. Robert's jaw tightened. You're crediting yourself with growth that came from many factors. Market conditions, investment decisions, team efforts. You were part of that success, but you weren't the entirety of it. I have documentation showing otherwise. Detailed records of every major initiative, every significant decision, every strategic shift that drove growth. Almost all of them originated with me. I implemented them. I made them work. You signed off on them and took credit, but the actual work was mine. I pulled out my first document, a timeline showing revenue growth correlated with specific initiatives I'd led, laid it on his desk. This shows the correlation between my projects and revenue increases. Notice how growth accelerates dramatically in years when I implemented major changes. Notice how it plateaus in years when you overrode my recommendations. Martin picked up the document, studied it, looked uncomfortable. This is an interesting analysis, Robert said carefully, but it doesn't change the fundamental reality. You were an employee. You were compensated for your work through salary and bonuses. The company's success belongs to the company and its shareholders, not to individual employees. Employees who were promised equity. Employees who were told repeatedly that when the company hit certain milestones, they'd become partners. Those promises created legitimate expectations. Promises aren't contracts, Martin said. Without written agreements, there's no legal obligation. Legal obligation isn't the only kind of obligation. There's also ethical obligation, moral obligation, the obligation not to lie to someone for 17 years while exploiting their labor. Robert's face reddened. I never lied to you. Circumstances changed. The company went public. The equity structure became more complex. That doesn't mean I was dishonest. You told me 2 months ago when I was working 100 hours a week to close the TechCore deal that once we hit 100 million, we'd talk seriously about partnership. We hit 112 million. The very next day you fired me. If that's not dishonest, I don't know what is. I didn't fire you. The board made a decision to bring in new leadership. I went along with it, but it wasn't my choice alone. You control 60% of voting shares. It was absolutely your choice. You can claim the board made you do it, but we both know that's not true. You wanted this. You planned it, probably for months. Robert stood up, walked to his window overlooking the parking lot, stood there with his back to me. What do you want, Michael? Let's cut to the chase. You're not here to negotiate in good faith. You're here to make demands. So make them. I pulled out my second document, a detailed list of every questionable business practice I'd witnessed over the years, laid it on his desk where Martin could see it. I want appropriate compensation for 17 years of undervalued service. I want recognition of my contributions. And I want the restrictive covenants removed from any agreement. No non-compete, no NDA beyond protection of genuine trade secrets. I walk away with my reputation intact and my ability to work in my field unimpeded. Martin picked up the second document, started reading, went pale. This is just a list of allegations. Most of these are standard business practices. Nothing here is illegal. Nothing is illegal, I agreed. But plenty would look bad if examined closely. By regulators, by journalists, by the investors who just bought into this merged company based on representations about your operations and ethics. Imagine if they discovered that some of those representations were, let's say, optimistic. Robert turned from the window. Are you threatening me? I'm negotiating. You want my silence and cooperation. I want fair compensation. That's just business, right? Nothing personal. How much? $500,000, plus removal of all restrictive covenants except a reasonable NDA protecting actual trade secrets, plus a letter of recommendation that accurately describes my contributions to the company's growth, plus my unvested retirement benefits, fully vested, regardless of the termination. Martin actually laughed. That's absurd. We're not paying you $500,000 to go away. Then I don't go away. I stay very present. I talk to journalists about my role in building this company. I talked to industry groups. I talked to the investors who were sold a story about visionary leadership when really they bought a company built by someone you just discarded. I make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here. You'll look petty, Robert said, like a disgruntled employee making excuses. Maybe. Or maybe I'll look like someone standing up for themselves after being exploited for 17 years. Maybe my documentation will speak louder than your spin. Maybe other companies will see what I built and decide they want that expertise working for them instead of against you. The room was silent. Martin was reading through my list of questionable practices, his face growing more concerned. Robert was staring at me like I'd become someone he didn't recognize. "You're really willing to burn it all down?" Robert asked. "Everything we built together. Your relationship with Catherine, your kids' relationship with their grandfather. You'd destroy all of that over money. You destroyed it when you fired me. I'm just deciding what to do with the wreckage. And yes, I'm willing to fight for what I'm owed. Finally, after 17 years of being too grateful and too accommodating and too willing to believe your promises, I'm done being that person." Robert sat back down, looked older suddenly, tired. "Martin, give us the room." "Robert, I don't think that's wise." I said, "Give us the room." Martin gathered his papers and left, closing the door behind him. Robert and I sat there alone, the way we had hundreds of times over the years. Strategy sessions, problem-solving meetings, planning conversations. But this was different. This was the truth, with no pretense. "I underestimated you," Robert said quietly. "I thought you were the nice guy, the hard worker who'd accept whatever I offered and move on quietly. I didn't think you had this in you." "Neither did I. You brought it out. Catherine is going to be devastated if you go through with this. If you air our dirty laundry publicly, it'll affect her standing in the company, her relationships with colleagues. It'll hurt her. You should have thought about that before you fired me. You should have thought about your daughter's marriage before you betrayed her husband. You should have considered the consequences beyond your own convenience." He was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "What if I give you $250,000? That's a significant increase. And I'll remove the non-compete if you agree to keep the NDA broad enough to protect the company." "Not enough, not close to enough. 300,000. That's my final offer. 500, plus everything else I asked for. That's mine." "You're being unreasonable. I'm being fair. For the first time in 17 years, I'm actually asking for what I'm worth instead of accepting whatever scraps you're willing to toss me. 500,000, no restrictive covenants beyond legitimate trade secret protection, accurate letter of recommendation, and full vesting of retirement benefits. That's the deal. And if I say no, then I walk out of here and start making phone calls. First to the journalists I know who'd love a story about the real power behind Cunningham Industries' success. Then to competitors who might be interested in hiring someone with detailed knowledge of your operations. Then to the SEC with questions about some of the representations made during the merger. I'll be very busy, Robert, and you'll spend all your time doing damage control instead of enjoying your newfound wealth." His face was a mask. I couldn't read what he was thinking, whether he was considering my offer or planning his counterattack. We sat there in silence for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. "I'll need to discuss this with the board," he said finally. "You have until Friday. After that, the offer expires and I start talking. You're backing me into a corner. You backed me into a corner first. I'm just fighting my way out." I stood up, started to leave, stopped at the door, and turned back. "One more thing. All those Sunday dinners, all those family gatherings, all those times you told me I was like a son to you. Did you mean any of it? Or was that just part of keeping me compliant?" Robert met my eyes. "I meant it. At the time. But business is business, Michael. You can't let personal feelings cloud judgment. You know what? I actually feel sorry for you, because you've sacrificed everything real for money and success. Your relationship with your daughter's husband, your grandchildren's respect when they're old enough to understand what you did, your integrity, and you don't even see what you've lost. You think you won, but you lost the things that actually matter." I left his office, walked past Linda, who was pretending not to have been listening at the door, took the elevator down to the lobby, walked out into the afternoon sun feeling lighter than I had in days. I'd stood up for myself, finally. After 17 years of bending and accommodating and accepting less than I deserved, I'd demanded my worth. And whether Robert agreed or not, whether I got the money or not, that act itself was valuable. I'd reclaimed something I'd lost years ago, my self-respect. The next few days were tense. Catherine was upset that I'd met with her father without telling her, that I'd made demands she considered unreasonable. We argued. She accused me of trying to destroy her family. I pointed out her father had already done that. She cried. I stayed firm. Thursday evening, Robert called. His voice was clipped, Professional. I've discussed your proposal with the board. They're willing to agree to $400,000. No non-compete beyond 6 months. NDA limited to legitimate trade secrets and proprietary processes. Letter of recommendation you can review before it's finalized, and full vesting of retirement benefits. That's as high as they'll go. 500 was the number. 400 is what we're offering. Take it or leave it. I thought about it. 400,000 was significantly more than the original 90. It was acknowledgement of my value. It was enough to give me breathing room to start over, to build something new. And the removal of most restrictive covenants meant I could work in my field without limitations. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I'll take it. Under one condition. The letter of recommendation specifically mentions my role in the TechCore merger. It acknowledges that I led that negotiation and brought the deal to closure. Silence. Then, fine. You'll have paperwork by tomorrow. Sign it, and we're done. We're done either way, Robert. The paperwork just determines how done. He hung up. I sat there holding my phone, feeling a complicated mix of victory and loss. I'd fought for myself and won something. But I'd also burned bridges that could never be rebuilt. My relationship with Catherine was strained possibly beyond repair. My kids were confused about why Daddy wasn't working for Grandpa anymore. Everything I'd built over 17 years was gone, but I'd gotten something in return. My dignity, my self-worth, the understanding that I wasn't just a cog in someone else's machine, that my contributions mattered, that I had value independent of Robert Cunningham's approval. The paperwork arrived Friday morning. I read through every word carefully, had Patricia review it to make sure there were no hidden provisions. Everything was as promised. $400,000 minus taxes. 6-month non-compete limited to direct competitors in our specific market niche. NDA covering trade secrets and proprietary information, but not my general knowledge or ability to discuss my role publicly. Letter of recommendation that, while not effusive, accurately acknowledged my contributions, including the TechCore merger. I signed, sent it back, and just like that, 17 years were over. The money hit my account the following week. I paid Patricia's fees, set aside taxes, put the rest in savings while I figured out what came next. What came next was complicated. Catherine and I tried to make things work, but too much had broken. She couldn't forgive me for going after her father. I couldn't forgive her for not standing with me. We went to counseling, tried to find middle ground, failed. We separated 6 months after my termination. She kept the house. I moved into an apartment downtown. We shared custody of Emma and Jacob, trying to minimize the impact on them, knowing we were failing at that too. Kids know when their parents' marriage is over, even when you pretend it's not. The divorce was finalized a year after that terrible meeting in Robert's conference room. Catherine got the house and primary custody. I got more time with my kids than I'd had while working 80-hour weeks, so that was something. We split assets, moved on to separate lives. I heard through mutual acquaintances that Robert told anyone who'd listen that I'd blackmailed him, that I was vindictive and opportunistic, that he'd tried to be generous and I'd repaid him with threats. His version became the accepted story in certain circles. I was the villain who'd turned on his benefactor. I didn't fight that narrative, didn't try to correct the record. I had my letter of recommendation and my money and my freedom to work in my field. The people who mattered, the people who might hire me or work with me, could form their own opinions based on my actual track record. 6 months after my divorce was final, I got a call from a headhunter, one of those executive recruiting firms that place high-level operations people. They'd been contacted by a company called Meridian Industrial, a mid-sized manufacturing operation, looking for someone to transform their operations and position them for growth. Did I happen to have any interest in that kind of challenge? I took the meeting. Met with the CEO, a woman named Jennifer Chen, who'd built Meridian from a small family business into a $50 million operation and wanted to take it further. We talked for 3 hours about strategy and implementation and building teams. She'd done her homework, knew about my work at Cunningham Industries, asked pointed questions about what I'd actually done versus what got credited publicly. I was honest about everything. The 17 years, the broken promises, the termination, the negotiation for a better severance. I didn't hide anything. "So you fought for yourself," she said when I finished. "After years of being undervalued, you finally stood up and demanded your worth. That's one way to frame it. It's the right way to frame it. Mr. Porter, I've built this company by recognizing talent and compensating it fairly. I need someone who can take us from 50 million to 200 million over the next 5 years. Someone who's done it before and knows exactly how to do it again. Someone who won't accept less than they deserve." That sounds like you. She offered me a position as Chief Operating Officer, Not VP, COO, real equity, not promises, profit sharing tied to performance metrics, a 5-year contract with provisions protecting me if things went south, everything in writing, everything enforceable. I took it, started rebuilding, building something that was actually mine this time, not just something I made for someone else, building with a CEO who valued transparency and fairness, building with equity that would actually materialize instead of evaporating into excuses. It took 3 years, but Meridian hit 150 million in revenue, on track for 200 the following year. My equity stake was worth several $1,000,000, more than I would have made in decades at Cunningham Industries, even if Robert had kept his promises. I heard through the industry grapevine that Cunningham Industries struggled after the merger. The cultures didn't integrate well. Key clients left. The operations division, now run by that guy Brandon, missed targets consistently. The company's stock price dropped. Robert's reputation took hits as problems emerged that I would have caught and fixed if I'd still been there. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. No sense of vindication. Just a distant acknowledgement that the company had been built on more than just Robert's vision. That the people who actually do the work matter. That you can't just swap them out like replaceable parts without consequences. Emma and Jacob are teenagers now, old enough to understand some of what happened, though I've tried to keep them out of the details. They know their grandfather and I don't speak anymore. They know their parents divorced partly because of work stuff. They know I'm happier now than I was when they were younger. Jacob told me last year when he was 13 that he decided he never wanted to work for family. That mixing business and personal relationships seemed like a recipe for disaster. I told him that was probably smart, that boundaries between work and life were important, that he should always make sure any promises he relies on are in writing. Emma asked me once if I regretted the way things turned out, if I wished I'd just signed the original severance and moved on quietly, if fighting had been worth it. I told her the truth, that I regretted how long it took me to stand up for myself, that I wished I'd set better boundaries earlier, asked for what I deserved instead of waiting for someone to offer it, that the fighting itself wasn't pleasant, but the self-respect I gained from it was invaluable. "Dad," she said, "you're not a pushover anymore. I never should have been one to begin with, but you figured it out. That counts for something." She was right. It did count. The path had been painful and destructive and had cost me my marriage and my relationship with my father-in-law and the stable life I'd thought I was building. But it had also given me something I'd been missing for years: agency. The understanding that I didn't have to accept whatever I was offered, that I could negotiate, that I could walk away, that my value wasn't determined by someone else's assessment. 5 years after that morning in Robert's conference room, I'm running operations for a thriving company, making more money than I ever did at Cunningham Industries, working reasonable hours, coming home to an apartment I actually spend time in instead of just sleeping, dating someone who has her own career and her own life and doesn't expect me to sacrifice myself for someone else's dreams. I'm building equity that's mine, making decisions that are recognized as mine, creating value that I'll actually benefit from instead of just making someone else rich. I see my kids regularly, have good relationships with them. They're proud of me, I think, proud that their dad didn't just accept unfair treatment, that he fought back, that he rebuilt after everything fell apart. Catherine and I are civil now. Co-parenting works. We don't talk about her father or the past, just focus on the kids and their needs. She's still working at Cunningham Industries, still in her ceremonial role, still choosing her family loyalty over seeing the truth. That's her choice. I don't judge it anymore. Just accept it and move on. I heard Robert had to step down as CEO last year. The board pressure finally got too intense after several quarters of declining performance. He's still chairman, still has his equity, still wealthy, but the empire he built, largely on my unpaid overtime and undercompensated expertise, is struggling. The company I spent 17 years building is slowly unraveling under leadership that values pedigree over competence. I take no pleasure in that. It represents thousands of people's jobs, people I worked with and cared about. But I also recognize that organizational decline often starts when companies prioritize loyalty over merit, when they discard their actual builders in favor of better resumes, when they forget that success comes from people, not structures. Cunningham Industries forgot that. They're paying the price, not in any dramatic immediate collapse, but in slow erosion, loss of market share, decreased innovation, talented people leaving for better opportunities. The kind of death that takes years but is ultimately inevitable once the foundation cracks. I didn't cause that death, but I'm not responsible for preventing it either. I gave them 17 years. They gave me a severance package. We're even. What happens now is their problem. My problem is building something better, and I am. Every day, with a team that's appreciated and compensated fairly, with a CEO who keeps her promises, with equity that actually vests, with a future that belongs to me instead of being borrowed from someone else's vision. This is what I learned. Loyalty is only valuable when it's reciprocated. Hard work is only worth it if it's appropriately rewarded. Promises are only meaningful if they're kept. And self-respect is something you give yourself, not something you earn from someone else. Robert Cunningham let me work for him for 17 years. He made me believe I was building something permanent, that my sacrifices would pay off, that loyalty would be rewarded. Then he replaced me the day I made him a millionaire many times over because I was no longer useful. He thought that would destroy me, that I'd slink away defeated and accept whatever scraps he offered, that I'd learn to be compliant and grateful and would stay that way even when betrayed. He was wrong. The betrayal broke something in me, yes, but it broke the chains, not the spirit. It freed me to finally see clearly, to finally value myself properly, to finally build something for myself instead of for someone else. That's worth more than any equity stake he never intended to give me, worth more than any partnership that was always just another carrot to keep me working for less, worth more than staying in a comfortable trap where I was appreciated just enough to prevent me from leaving, but never enough to actually reward my contributions. I walked away from 17 years, fought for fair compensation, started over at 48 years old, rebuilt everything from scratch, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because the life I have now, the one I built for myself on my own terms, is better than any version I was constructing in someone else's empire. That's the lesson. That's the truth I wish I'd learned at 26 instead of 46, that you teach people how to treat you. That acceptance of less than you deserve becomes permission to give you even less. That the only person responsible for advocating for your value is you. Robert taught me that lesson the hard way, but I learned it, finally, completely, and I'm living proof that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, never too late to demand what you're worth, never too late to walk away from people who don't value you and find people who do. So if you're in a situation like I was, if you're being undervalued and overpromised, if you're sacrificing yourself for someone who takes you for granted, let me tell you this: you deserve better. Your contributions matter. Your time has value. Your expertise is worth more than whatever crumbs someone else is willing to share. Stand up for yourself. Document your worth. Know your value. And if the people you're working for won't recognize it, find people who will. It won't be easy. It might cost you relationships and stability and the comfortable trap you've been living in. But on the other side is something better, something real, something yours. I know, because I'm living it. 5 years after walking out of that conference room, 5 years after demanding my worth, 5 years after refusing to accept less than I deserved, I'm happier and more successful than I ever was working 80-hour weeks to build someone else's dream. That's not revenge, that's justice, the kind you create for yourself when no one else will give it to you. Have you ever stood up for yourself after years of being undervalued? Have you ever had to walk away from something comfortable because it wasn't right? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone in these struggles makes all the difference. And if this story resonated with you, if it gave you courage or perspective or hope, subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Let's build a community of people who know their worth and refuse to accept less, because we're not just employees or family members or convenient tools for someone else's ambitions. We're people with value, with contributions that matter, with lives that deserve to be lived on our own terms. My father-in-law let me work for him for 17 years, then replaced me the day I made him a millionaire. He thought that was the end of my story. He was wrong. It was just the beginning.